Well, last night I joked that we kept a carrot for last to keep you here, and I have absolute faith that you're going to be thoroughly engaged by people who probably don't plant carrots, but our moderator curates shows that are about growing carrots in cities, among other things. And I'm going to introduce her. She's a colleague who told me last night she was, and this may reassure people who are engineers in the room, felt a little out of her usual element. And it never occurred to me that Radhika Subramaniam, who's the director of our gallery, who does shows that are so consonant with what's going on at Parsons in design, would feel that way. But I wanted translations. I deliberately invited a sociologist and engineer so that we would have to test our terms. So I'm hoping you'll test our terms. Radhika is, as I mentioned, the director of our gallery at the New School, the Sheila C. Johnson Design Center is its proper name. She's also an assistant professor in the school that I teach in. Her curatorial practice is cross-disciplinary and dialogic, a word that hasn't come up much, but one that bears thinking about. Committed to public pedagogy, critical urbanism, political and social justice. She's been the director of the cultural programs at the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, was the founding and executive editor of Connect, an interdisciplinary art journal, and she's done numerous shows, too long to list right now. She's received a seed fund teaching in urban studies from the San Francisco Art Museum. She has a PhD in performance studies and an MA in anthropology. So she is the perfect New School citizen and the perfect moderator.
Thank you, Susan. And indeed, I do feel, despite my several years of tenure here at, not tenured, but just existence here at Parsons, that this isn't quite my element. And you might know from my bio that, yes, I come out of anthropology, performance. I've been a curator for many years. So I see my role here as actually a role that I'll describe more from a kind of performance context. In India, where I originally come from, my part of the world, classical and folk performances often draw from mythological or stories that get told and retold many times over. But the person that connects them to the local audience is a narrator, called a narrator, but the Indian or the Sanskrit term for that is sutradhar. A sutradhar is the person who threads, is the person. So sutra is the thread, and the person who sutures that to the local context, making the translation between what's happening in myth to what's happening in local politics is that narratological task. And so I hope that I can somehow make this connection between what's happening, what will happen on this panel, to what's happening here. Last night, Chris Bull asked me, what's the difference between agency and social engagement? Because these are two panels that were set up today, and what really makes them different? I fobbed the question off to Susan last night because I said, well, she's the organizer, she should tell you. But I have been thinking about that because this is the end of the day and all of you have stayed through the day. So what is it that this panel will do or can do that might be somewhat different from what the panel on agency, with which I felt a great deal of kinship and enthusiasm. And so I was thinking indeed about the Living Concrete Carrot City show that Nevin Cohen, a colleague here in food studies, and I co-curated. And we had a vast array of programs as part of that exhibition, which was on urban agriculture and food systems and sort of social justice issues. And the panels had ranged from everything from design to the place of art to the role of policymakers, etc. But every Wednesday, as we had these panels, the conversation would end up about soil. And so it was actually, Rama, wherever Rama is, I was very pleased that you said that. And the greatest concern ended up being New York City soil. And at a certain point, Nevin and I would almost time, and we would say, how many seconds to the soil conversation? So it was interesting to think that all of these big issues about social justice and growing and how communities come together and local neighborhoods, etc., began to be very much about the ground beneath us. And so that's the area where I think we might tease out something different in the conversation around social engagement that might be slightly different from the issues that were raised in the session on agency, which is, what is the terrain, the confused and complex terrain that's called engagement, but that is very much about a texture that rests in between. That rests in the recognition that we speak from a ground beneath us, that we speak in a ground together, and that we are in some senses of a ground that might be in common or in opposition, but in a contested terrain. And rather wonderfully, both panelists today speak very much and quite literally from a ground beneath us. We are going to actually start first with Alexander Eaton, who has worked at the intersection of social justice and environmental sustainability for the last 10 years. He's the CEO and founder of Sistema Biobolsa. He's developed, as part of which he developed a modular biodigester system to convert animal waste into methane gas and fertilizer. Alex is also a founding member of the Latin American Biodigester Network, promoting technology through research and collaboration in over 15 countries. He runs the Mexico Biogas Program through the International Renewable Resources Institute. He's currently the Director of Sustainability at Charity Water, a nonprofit based in New York, developing long-term strategies to keep water sources flowing in 20 countries through local field partners. A longer bio is there in your program, and I refer you, so I'm just picking the highlights. And it will be followed by Aldo Cibic. Aldo was born in Vicenza in '55. Since 1977, he started to work with Ettore Sozzas, becoming his partner in 1980. The same year, he founded Memphis, of which he was one of the designers. And in 1989, he founded his own studio, and at the same time, he started to collaborate with various universities. His main office in Milan is involved in urban architectural and interior projects. He's the founder of Cibic Workshop, a research interdisciplinary with projects ranging from environment development, new services, activities concept, to product design. So please welcome Alexander Eaton.
Thank you, and thanks for Susan for the invitation, and thank you, and sort of lament all the amazing conversation that we've had so far, because now my concise little conversation is all tangential and broken up. So I met Susan at the first design conference I'd ever spoken at, and which was kind of interesting because I'm not a designer. I'm not really even an engineer. It turns out I'm a social entrepreneur, but I didn't find that out until ways into the conversation. And I really like the conversation before here, because this idea of social entrepreneurship, I think, comes at this cross-section of design and implementation and identifying critical problems and trying to react to them in a very literal way. I actually started as a journalist, so I really like this idea of taking integrity into what you do. The idea of journalists is to ask questions and to not present judgment as you re-explain what you learned. And so I, through sort of a very human experience, ended up working in Mexico, and not really with an agenda to do anything development oriented, but I had been working in the field as a journalist. And I noticed a series of problems that were both surrounding the way that marginalized communities were able to meet their basic needs, but also sort of the message that was coming down. Mexico's a really amazing place to work because you've got the richest man in the world and the poorest living essentially side by side across every climate and socioeconomic conditions you can really imagine. And so there's an interesting message about what agriculture, and which is the idea of providing food for communities. There's a message of industrialization that you get in Mexico because it has one foot so firmly in this sort of developed world, But then the way that that translates into the reality of Mexico is much more messy. And I've really found that interesting as you work in this cross-section of cultures in Mexico. Essentially, it's Latin America as a whole essentially was just riddled with bullets kind of literally 500 years ago, and then has never really recovered in a way to fully identify itself. And Mexico, to me, is an open wound in that it's sort of healing in distorted way as it accepts the future, but also has these links to its past. So we really started working on this, the injustices surrounding basic needs and energy provisions and sanitation and water. And this is one of my more illustrious photos here. The color tones and composition's beautiful, but it's also basically something that's so solidly considered waste in a modern dialogue, but also is filled with, under a different lens, is filled with nutrients and energy. I really love that today started with a cellular look at the world with Jenny's presentations, because we spend a lot of time understanding how our living systems and how that can impact things. So the more boring part of this presentation is actually the technology, and so I'm going to try to move through it really quickly. We designed a modular biodigester system which takes this and turns it into methane gas, which then can be used for energy, and the byproduct of which is now a treated effluent that can be used for fertilizer. These are industrial scale versions of the technology that's been around for a while, and then there's a number of sort of low-tech versions of this technology which have all of the signatures of a technology being translated to poor people, so we make cheap technology. And so when I started working, understanding that biodigesters could be an interesting solution, I was looking at digesters as this really broad platform. So you can have a whole range of different types of organic waste can go in. The effluent can be used for a whole range of agriculture. Methane can be used in a whole range of energy, from thermal to mechanical to electrical. So, but in the context, and appropriate technology is a term I really grew to hate, because to me it sort of meant like duct tape and bubble gum and bamboo, and you can only use materials that you can actually reach from where you're sleeping, and it's this kind of odd sense of restriction that's put on design, and sometimes I feel like it can undermine things like durability and resilience. And we wanted something that could scale, that was easy to use, could be adaptable to a wide variety of farms, and obviously had a price point, modular and uninstallable for some interesting reasons. So we came up with Sistema Biobolsa. It's a modular digester that can come in an order of magnitude of sizes and can adapt to a number of different farms. The innovation is that these are two full 6,000-liter tanks in the back of a truck. So traditionally, these would be made out of brick or something. And the idea is something that's simple and robust and has multifunction and can be installed really quickly with kind of unskilled labor, which is also sort of a big departure from traditional. And it's also very flexible. It's made out of really durable membranes that'll last a really long time, so it comes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. And the idea is you've got sort of, Mexico kind of has a lot of hard edges. I like this shot because you've got the cactuses in the background and the desert, and the idea of sort of putting a modular form in that's flexible and almost cellular and can scale and grow and shrink. And it's actually an organism, or even more precisely, billions of organisms inside a bladder that essentially digest organic materials. And so we spent a lot of time finding the appropriate cross-section of how this technology can be scalable. You can see one iteration, we were using this sort of recycled bottle as a pressure release valve, and so it was always this interface with this high-tech digester. The membrane's quite complicated and only made in a few countries, and then we actually turned that into a product in Mexico. but everything besides the membrane itself, we wanted you to be able to buy it next door, and so that it could sort of have this longevity. So the idea was we were taking this industrial product in a bunch of different phases and trying to adapt it down to a domestic sector and in a wide range, really. And so these photos are intended to sort of juxtapose against the little girl in the beginning, the idea of how like really low-income indigenous families can use a technology that really provides a lot of benefits. And now these sorts of conferences and these sorts of conversations have allowed us to analyze, or actually in retrospect, our process is kind of, our process I think is an interesting translation of the type of work that we're doing, because we really started with this problem, and I think there was a conversation over lunch where, like, in the gender lens, how guys just try to solve problems so very literally in this maybe more linear sense. And so the design process was really iterative with the communities that we were working with, and that's how we fleshed out those design criteria. But also we realized that the technology in and of itself sort of represented something more than it was actually its function. It had provided us with this platform to have conversations around energy and waste and water and agriculture that would be a little bit more contrived if you weren't actually implementing the project at the time. So it actually ended up being this window to allow, all of my technicians are different engineers or vets, but to allow a vet to be talking about cooking practices and indoor air quality issues, and so we were really sort of cross-cutting in a bunch of different areas using this technology. And I really like this idea of the transformation, or the idea of being able to do otherwise. It's a great phrase. And so we started seeing that the technology itself might not actually be the big innovation. It might just be the idea of the technology. And we sort of realized that we became reality TV stars in Mexico at some point in time through this really strange twist. And so while we were doing this work on the ground, we're also on live TV in front of 60 million people in Mexico, and people were wearing T-shirts, and everyone, like all these people in the city that have never grown anything, had all these T-shirts that were talking about like poop grows carrots, and like all these really like sort of provocative transformations between waste and resources and closing loops. And we realized that the message that was inherent within the digester itself sort of crossed a bunch of themes regarding social equity, innovation, closing loops, this idea of how you're starting actually with like shit really, and then you're translating it into a series of really important, valuable outcomes. And I like using that word because it's just so directly linked with waste. It's something of no value, if, you know, sort of per definition. And so the idea that we can actually produce a bunch of outcomes that then have sub-outcomes and can have broader ramifications through someone's life. And then we started playing with other projects really conceptually. This is work that we do in Haiti, and I'll be there early next week. And it's basically now like removing it from the farmyard, this idea that really closing loops in human waste and the social justice implications that it has for people that actually don't have access to general waste. And this is what some of these treatment systems look like in food deserts in Haiti, where you all of a sudden didn't have a toilet, energy, or food production, and through one simple technology, you're applying it all. But it's not like this is, oh, this technology solved everything. You're opening up a conversation that really puts emphasis on a bunch of really important things. And as we started doing this, it was this idea of how the iterations, how we were measuring, how we were learning, how we were adapting and repeating, how that continued to be, and the technology itself improved. It got cleaner, it got more reliable, it started to do more things. And sort of with that ever critical idea, obviously we didn't want it just to be isolated in technology, so we really started pushing this idea of how we were promoting it, and that the message and the medium or how they were linked. And so it's not the same to do a community invitation, because you've got this male-female dynamic within Mexican rural communities. And so how were women being included? How were events being designed? And this idea of how the role that gender plays in rural Mexico, and what our role as a company was in that. Because I'm just do a quick tangent. So the social entrepreneur, I was chosen as an Ashoka Fellow in 2011, and Bill Drayton spent 30 years talking about the social entrepreneur. It started to get recognition and then was just immediately twisted around in a really interesting way. And the idea of a social entrepreneur is to be disruptive and to be solving problems in society. What's happened with the term social entrepreneur is that you've got this social good and it's being crammed just into our current commercial market. And so the first thing that I'm told when I present someone this, it's highly local work, it's really working with a high sense of empathy with communities, is how are you going to scale it? And that's like the first question, and almost the only bar that we're ever measured by. And so I've got a great answer. We have a factory. We're going to scale this thing. Is it really going to work that way? I doubt it. I really, really doubt it. There's no investors in here, I hope. But like, the idea is that that we're sort of forced into this unrealistic box as this social entrepreneur, because now you've got this, you've just been disruptive, now jump into the mainstream and let's mass produce this thing, and why don't you make it in China? And all of these conversations, like, why doesn't it cost $100? Why does it cost, you know, $800? Nobody can afford that. These are all things that I think we're sort of plagued with in the development community, these sort of double-edged swords. So, so this is the work that started to really be impactful for me, was how this inclusion was being integrated directly into our work. And we do a lot of work in the Yucatan, and one of the sayings there is "Un pueblo se conoce por sus voces, sus cantos, y sus sueños," and that's this thing that's written in stone. It means that a community is known for its voices, its songs, and its dreams. And so that concept written in stone is something that's transversal within Mayan culture, but yet each one of those three elements is something that's so fleeting in the moment. So we started really playing around with this idea that this is a community that has legend and all of these different things, but yet the modern Mayan is completely disconnected from the traditional Mayan of the temples, yet there's obviously like a linear continuity between the people. And that's actually there's sort of two different cultures in a way. And so as we start working on deeper areas of impact and trying to understand how the education surrounding the work that we're doing can be more solidly integrated into the kids, into the communities, we started thinking a lot about legend and what the narrative surrounding our program was. And so in Mayan, when we were doing most of these communities speak Mayan, and a lot of the grandmothers don't know how to speak Spanish at all. So when we were doing some of the sort of evaluations, they started talking about the tubenkak. And I hadn't heard that name before, so I asked the translator to ask her what it means, and they're saying, oh, that's what we're calling the biodigester, the tubenkak. And I asked what the translation was, and he kind of was a little puzzled, and he's like, it's not really common to hear those two words together, but it's the new flame. So I started like thinking about the new flame and realizing that in parallel, the flame is the grandfather of grandfathers. It's the origin of everything. So all of a sudden you've got this idea of a new flame, and so like we started thinking about that. Where would a new flame come from, and why would there be a new flame in a community? And what ended up happening is that we wrote a legend, and we were sitting on the side of a cenote where legendarily there's these dragons that come out of it. And so we wrote this legend of a battle between a red dragon and a blue dragon, and it's sort of this this translation across time of how people first harness fire, and then at some point in time, a new blue dragon, so they became the tribe of the red fire, and then this new blue dragon comes and sort of teaches them how to convert waste and other things it starts quite abstract as a legend, but then it ends up sort of translating directly into the community where we are. And so at the end, the anecdotal is that you've got this digester at the end that's filled with billions of small blue dragons that you're feeding the waste to. And so the kids then become the tribe of the new dragon, and we have all these activities surrounding art and education about their participation in the project. And what I think it does is connects this idea of historical relevance, and it takes legend and narrative and it really actually brings it to the present moment and then looks towards the future as it asks a bunch of questions. And I think that's really interesting, how technology, even though potentially benign or non-spectacular in what it actually does. I mean, we've actually won quite a few awards and things, but really this is a bag that you put animal manure in, and like almost any bag that you put animal manure in, gas will come out. And so that's my patent, basically. And so we're realizing that the power of this is in a conversation, that linking the sort of traditional sense or even the biomimicry in a way of what it means to, as a society, look at this idea of no waste, and changing the idea that something is a waste product, but in nature there is no waste. So waste is a completely human construct in a way. That if you start breaking that and then layering on these narratives, you get this really sort of beautiful outcome. And so I work with a woman named Liliana Palacios, and she's got a project that's focused on art education. And so this is a group of like pretty rough and tumble, like rural Mexico can't really be idealized or categorized in a way. It's this mixture of indigenous and mestizo cultures sort of locked across this interesting sort of scale of time and modernity and violence and all sorts of other things. And she's got them all with their eyes closed, their hands on their hearts, and they were like invited to an agricultural lecture. So there's a bunch of guys with like cowboy hats on in the back, and they're trying to figure it out. And a lot of times you'll have the men and women separate in a room, but then she'll have everybody hold hands. So you've got about 15 macho dudes holding hands, like eyes closed and maybe humming. And it's this funny thing, and she loves the ridiculousness of it in some ways, but it's about creating this layer of empathy that I think sometimes is this intangible quality that we often leave out of design. And it's this idea of how do you stare it in the face and make it an integral part of what you do, and like how do we bring communities together around this to create really kind of hyper-local solutions and to have people really involved. These are the sort of two spectrums of what I work on. This idea of being able to have GIS models and know where all of our digesters are and measure them in real time. But then there's the idea of making sure each one of those pinpoints becomes a person that has, is a person with all the complexities that is. I just want to touch on something really quick. We were the first non-MFI Kiva partner. So we were the first people providing loans that we weren't a loan operation. And so what we innovated for Kiva was that we really had to explain to these people that never had access to loans what it meant to have a loan. And so the empathy and beauty of somebody or 50 people coming together to lend Josue some money in this is a really beautiful concept, and I think we're all aware of that aspect of Kiva. There was this other really interesting aspect of bringing the loan sheet of all the people that had loaned to Josue and explaining to him why people from 15 countries had lent him money for his digester to benefit him, in the sense of responsibility and sort of linking that empathetic connection and changing this power dynamic between I'm donating to you and I've got money and you don't, poor guy, and you're like worth a cup of coffee a day to me or something like that. So, and I think that that's maybe something that in development we potentially leave out, in the sense of we are getting a lot out of this kind of work. And where Susan and I met was a design conference in which the whole new idea was social design. And so it was like throwing, and somebody decided to define social design, which was design that improves the lives of people and intends to make society better. And so I was thinking, like, So if you take social off, designers like don't think about that at all, or what is it? So it seems like once we start talking about social entrepreneurism and these sorts of things, if you're not striving to make people's lives better, and you're not, both for what it gives you and for what it adds to people, I think then obviously we're missing an opportunity. And I think that that's where we're at in this point where we can sort of stare at the ridiculousness of mass production and say the value of knowing where my stuff comes from has a value to me, and it's something that we want to go, because there is no logic against that mass production. I mean, logically it has a lot of sense. So I think we need to fight up against this, because these kids are something I always like to end with. They got a digester when they were like 1, 2, and 3. This is their job. They have to jump on it and massage the dragon, which, no dirty jokes, please. They basically go out and they'll never know a world in which the poop that their animals make doesn't cook their food or fertilize their land. They've got this closed circle mentality since they were kids. They'll never have to be introduced to that. So their circular thinking is already going to be so much more mature than ours that I'm just really excited about the ideas and the frameworks that these kids will come up with as they're sort of addressing these same questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. I'm already so happy because I enjoyed so much these 2 days. I met many fantastic people, many new friends, a lot of new ideas for making new projects. So basically, what I'm going to show you, there are 2 main projects. One that was done in 2004 for the Biennale of 2004, and one for the Biennale of 2010, and they are more or less one the continuation of the other. The origin, basically, of this work started in the 90s. I was teaching at Domus Academy in Milano, and we did a lot of work in service design. We started the service design work with your friend Ezio Manzini. At that time, he was not so much a believer on service design, I must say. It changed, not enough. And basically, after I've done many, we have done The Solid Side, which was a book on these issues, and we have done many workshops in different schools, very exciting, and the discussion today, I'd like to continue together because it's very interesting, because I believe in a very big potential on service design, because it really is a world to be expanded, and I think that America is more interested than the other place to develop this, but this is another issue. And at a certain moment, after having done many of these kind of projects of service design, we wanted to pass to the activity, to the territory. Basically, how can I say, to pass looking at what is happening around in the territory, in the community. And talking about soil, I just kept the one on the soil. So micro-realities, the subtitle is a project about places and people. And this was the first generator of the fact that basically was shifting from the idea of architecture that is generating a place, while saying that are the action of the peoples that they are generating a place. So to have a more humanistic approach, in which what we were showing was not the architecture, but through a storytelling, how things and how life could happen. The Vegetable Garden City, we started in 2002 in Venice, in the university in Venice with a little group. And the subtitle was Living the Season, was basically a simulation, was not started because of the problem of the soil and because of loving the nature, but was a socio-economical issue about how in that moment was already visible the situation in which the middle class was dramatically losing buying power and an image. And so in the idea of a world in which for whatever you have to do, you have to spend money, the idea was how to work, referring to the old vegetable garden of the retired people, how to make a new formula, a new format of a rural park, which was kind of a higher level of experience place for a family. So the beginning, in fact, what I was saying is to leave the city on Friday evening by car, bicycle, or subway and find yourself in a new reality, a reality where time is paced by the rhythm of nature, to have a cabin surrounded by greenery, to closely experience the season and their cycles, to learn how to grow the products of the earth, to share spaces and get to know other people, a place where small children can play, a recreational activity to regenerate body and spirit. So this idea to have a nice experience, to have the Tuscany outside Milano, I mean, to have small places and to show, to see what you can do. I mean, having lived a very distracted life, at a certain point, you start to take care again of yourself. And you go to the basics, and you see how you can really enjoy what you have without necessarily spending a lot of money. And so there were all the story about the season, the idea of this week architecture, but that they become a place, another place from where you live during the week. So you go with your family, and Saturday morning, the kids, they can have a teacher, a science teacher, showing them what's happening in a 1 square meter of green. Or, I mean, to have, if I want to have the vegetables, but I'm lazy, there is some retired guy that can do for me that because I'm very lazy, and he's happy. It's a microeconomy that you are going to activate. And for somebody who wants to see, there are all the videos of these projects, just to show in quite a naive way, but in my opinion, in a human way, how life can happen, how many things you can do, just with a little piece of land outside your city. Having as a goal always the idea of a beautiful place. Beautiful place because of the quality of what you have, and beautiful place because of the kind of relation that you can establish in a place. So an idea of beauty which includes the totality and not just a physically aesthetical point of view. So you see the season, you see winter, you see you have the garden, the idea that in the summertime you have a little lake where you can swim. Winter is for different activities. You can have young people, they can put their tent there. So for different social levels, I mean age levels, to have what is a different idea of entertaining, of spending your time, or that could become the place where you can spend your life. And this is the first one. These 4 projects, basically, because the idea for which we are developing this type of projects is because we really love, but it's also that as an interior design and architecture and design office, we have decided not to spend our money in making design competitions, but in developing things in which we were believing. So also with the idea that is not realized yet, that this is becoming our work of the future, because we consider that these are contemporary issues that can be developed, it can become a real business. The story, for example, of the vegetable garden city became, for many people that we met and we are now dealing, an example also of a new type of tourism. Tourism that in Italy you can do a lot, but also here in any countryside outside of historical city, in different type of situations. So not necessarily outside, in the outside of a big city. While micro-realities was basically a total invented projects, when we have been invited by the Japanese architect Sejima in 2010 in the Biennale of Venice, we decided to try to have ideas on 4 projects with real place, real people living in these places, so to show exactly how the transformation from the state in which they are could become through this narrative, let's say. Rethinking Happiness, subtitle is Do Unto Others as You Would Have Them to Do Unto You. Starts with kind of a manifesto that when we have done was the idea of the state of the art of what was happening. So, I mean, all the critical issue about integration, personal safety, food safety, energy safety, sources, economy, waste, all things that has been spoken in these days, the suburb degrade. And so the idea of the title was the idea not of enjoying life in a relaxed way in a vacation place, but how to build an attitude toward future in which we are designing our future. We are rolling up, how do you say, our sleeves to create, to be responsible in creating what in which we can believe. I mean, I think that if you see a lot of passivity in society, is because sometimes there are no projects. Today you are showing the Brooklyn project where a community has a meaning to do something. So the problem is always the activating of a situation in which everybody can be part of it. Otherwise, you have just people complaining. But if you have an alternative to their complaint, giving them something to do, I think this is part of what we are talking about. The 4 projects, the first, new communities, new polarities, how a small center becomes a larger center, is related to a real company. There's a company, very known, it's called Diesel, making jeans. That is very close to where I have my main house in Vicenza, it's close to the mountains. And in this company, there are 1,000 young person working, coming from every part of the world. They live in a fantastic natural environment, which is exactly what you see in these drawings, because it's surrounded by vineyards, there are the hills and the pre-Alps. But all the time that all these guys, they would prefer to live in Milano, because in Milano they would have more action, and all this beauty for them is nothing. So either you are able to find a way to activate something because of function, because of possible opportunities of meeting, etc., that this place, these people, they become a community at all senses, in all senses, or this place remains just, they suffer the condition to be there. So this is a discussion that we are bringing on with this entrepreneur to build this kind, which is not exactly a company town, but becomes a place in which these people, these young people, they can recognize themselves. And because in this part of Italy there are many interesting companies, from fashion to technology, I mean, the idea is how this can become the new polarity, the places where new ideas can come out. And really, in fact, they are becoming also as an image, a new place, and a place in which, in a moment like this moment in Italy, which is a moment of deep crisis, places which are the motor for showing other possible way of acting. So, what we do, and because of the subject of this seminar is a narrative. I mean, what we stress very much is this idea in how you show the story, in how little drawings or models or little action of the people, they can show how this can happen. A similar project is regarding this place in the Venice Lagoon. We called it a campus in the field Venice Agro-Techno Valley. And the name is because we are talking about a company, a internet incubator company that they established in the Venice Lagoon. Venice Lagoon is another incredible landscape with an incredible nature, with an incredible biodiversity that is not so much valorizzata. How do you say valorizzata? Valorized. Valorized. And the idea, again, they're also in this place, 250, and they're growing very rapidly. Internet guys making very interesting projects on internet, making basically new startups. And but they are very insulated because, again, the place is beautiful, but they live in emergency situation in the little towns nearby. And so the idea is how to create a center, to create a piazza. This morning, I don't remember, somebody was talking of the piazza, of the square, that for us Italian, I live in Vicenza, so the piazza, I mean, is the living room of the city, is the place where everybody meets. Now we have a lot of Americans because it's the biggest base in Italy, and they enjoy a lot this different quality of life. The square, in this place, we have a main square. We have, let's say, the places where all these people can work and live. But the idea is that it's becoming a fantastic touristic place. We have a lot of tourism coming from the north, that they are not just interested in the 2 months of the beach vacation on the nearby places, but as in the project of the vegetable garden, the idea is that it's such a miracle from the naturalistic point of view, this place, that all during the year you can enjoy what's happening, and from the point of view of what you see with the flora and the fauna of the place. So agriculture, garden, tourism, technology. The idea was to have the hotel made with the houseboats. And these are scenes of the life in the place and the harbor. And this is my partner, Chuck, making these suggestive images of the Venice Lagoon. And all the things like how the camping is taught, etc. The next one, we pass to the suburb of Milano. We are close to Politecnico, close to Bovisa. And there is this new intersection of the subway and the train. The little town there, Afori, is not an appealing town. There is a lot of decay. So the first idea is how to make a very nice square, a public place where all the activity of the area of the little town, of the little district can happen. And also the idea is to make a small a development of little apartment, a building made of little apartments that becomes, this was an interesting study we did also with our friend sociologist, in the fact that there are a lot of extra-communitarian and a lot of students in the area that basically they have the same income, they say the same buying power, they have no reason to have conflicts. In Italy there is quite a little of racism, especially on the north. There are parties that are based on this ideology. And the idea is that having this park, having all the services, all the functions happening in the lower part of the building, I mean from kindergarten, the restaurant, the library, I mean how to create something which is useful for all the district and becoming, even if you have a small room, all the services that you need downstairs, so the small room having all these facilities is no more a handicap. These are the images. Last one, rural urban is the center, the city enters in the countryside enters in the city. This was the suggestion of this developer in Shanghai that has this land just north of the river, where he has already done a city with 25,000 people living, and he has this agriculture part in which he wanted, because he said we are using so much land and we are killing the agriculture, I'd like to show a way in which you maintain the agriculture, but you can live also. And the idea that came out from our proposal was kind of a central park surrounded by houses, elevated because the circulation is down, mixed to the agriculture happening in the middle. Agriculture that for them is a very rich agriculture, so I mean all the expensive agriculture, because is a very fertile land. These, if you can see, are the first sketches showing what is happening in the middle, all the street under the houses, all the little vegetable garden close to the houses, so all the people their little vegetable garden. And the middle on top you see the market, which is the border, the edge between the inside and the outside of the development. Here my partner Chuck did a lot of images on, for example, the polyculture farming. That is the same thing that is happening already in the Venice Lagoon, so where you make fish and you grow vegetables in the same place. These are other situations of other moment of the life of the place. This was something that when Chuck, my partner, did was one of the most beautiful emotions I had in the last years, in the sense that is an idea to show how you can bypass marketing working on the genius loci. I mean, the idea was to show how China has deep roots in agriculture, and the story show with the first circle, I mean, was the lunar calendar. Lunar calendar was 12 periods, all related to the agriculture. So when the insects go to hibernation, where the rugiada, I would say the water on the grass gets iced. I mean, when the Jesuit Matteo Ricci comes in China at the end of the 16th century, he brings the solar calendar, divided in 24 periods, which are again related to the moment of the nature. What we have done in the outside is to put at the same time all the holidays of the Chinese holidays in these during the years, and all the globalized holidays, to show this, to have the idea of how the place, this is the same for the Venice Lagoon or for any other place, how you work on a genius loci showing what's happening all around the year, so there is no wasted time, there is not some, every period has something to give. This was the idea. And here there is the resume of all the elements of the place, with all the little invention using, I don't know, on top of the parking lot, we have done different things from the cultivation of the herbs to the mini golf to the tennis court, or all the different iconic places that you see in this. This is the fish market, and this is how it appears. The barns, the place for the birds, the temple of the water, of the rainwater, the guy who is painting with the tradition with water on the marble that then disappears, the tree of the gift, and here you see all the pieces. And in the Biennale, we show the 4 models and all the process of these. What happens today is that many of these projects, little by little, are becoming true. And because I'm not an academic, but I do this work, my dream is to see this to happen before in this life, not when I'm gone. Thank you.
So thank you both for an extraordinarily related but very generatively located set of presentations. I'm just going to start just trying to ask some questions just to see if we can get a conversation going amongst us, and then turn it to the audience who probably have questions as well. And I was actually thinking about stories, since stories is where we began, and Susan's quotation from yesterday that it was important to observe before anything happens. And in what seemed to me even more important in both your presentations was not just the capacity to observe, but actually the capacity to listen, to be quiet and to listen before one is able to undertake anything. And Alex, your invocation of the Mayan idea that that things sort of begin to appear in songs and dreams, and the rethinking happiness, which is very much about creating a world that, in a sense, we are dreamed into, and then hopefully also then comes to pass, began to get me thinking about how one has to create a story that is a world, that is a story that has to enter our dream space, our imaginative space, in order for it, in a sense, as a design, if you will, to be successful. So the children who are jumping on the dragon, it has to enter that kind of deep dream space that comes up somewhere from behind you and up you, right? And is already part of one's imbued sense of being and a certain sense that this is part of the world for that to happen. So that was sort of one idea that I wondered if you might, either one of you or both of you might speak to. And the other is the fact that dreams are related to surprises that are sometimes called nightmares, sometimes just odd things. And that was, I mean, maybe more for you, Alex, because you said some of these have already been installed, but the bio plants are sort of in place. And so I wondered if there were sort of surprising things that happened that are not part of what you might necessarily, not part of what the project is necessarily intended for in the first place. When many conversations with Nevin about and other colleagues about urban agriculture, we've always said you might not be able to eat the tomatoes because they're all grown on toxic soil, but the whole act of getting together and growing the tomatoes is worth it, right? And that does something else for a group of neighbors who might have been neighbors but never spoken to each other, but they're coming together to either take tomatoes, borrow tomatoes, share my eggplant. That is a whole other completely attendant formation of community, for lack of a better term, something else that happens. So it's not necessarily nightmarish, but it's a completely separate thing that has nothing to do with growing agriculture for food. So these are two slightly different questions, but I wondered if it might inspire either one of you to start.
Yeah, we've certainly had some unintended results. I just recently visited a project that's about health and food security based on, proportioning this kind of organic fertilizer. And the byproduct in that case is the gas, and so we're looking for use. And I showed up at one of the houses, and the guy had spent a bunch of years in the U.S., and he had just moved back down to Mexico and had his digester, and he showed me this deep fryer that he'd made, and he was like, Dunkin' Donuts, right? And was making donuts for the community. So that was sort of this interesting use of excess energy, obviously, that wouldn't be sort of my idealized use necessarily. And but mostly they've been positive in the sense that we provided a really benign platform, and the way the fertilizers used, or the way the energy is used, or even how and what waste streams are put into the digester are really open for context. So people have surprised us with these really amazing adaptions of motors to do functional things, and people that don't have access to mechanical energy can really surprise you. And then how waste goes in and what waste goes in. And that's been really exciting. I think the interesting piece about this narrative, however, is what you're talking about is neighbors that haven't really communicated. And we work a lot with this idea of story of place, which is why I really think Aldo's work is phenomenal, in that a lot of people know their history or know some version of their history, but don't spend a lot of time thinking about their future. And I think that right now, sort of the macro political situation in Mexico is a country without a vision. It sort of vaguely wants to be China serving the U.S. I mean, it's got a lot of struggles in that sense. And so I think that what we've been able to do in the places where this narrative has worked is that we start creating an idea of the future and start writing a history of place. Where does your water come from? Where does your fertilizer come from? I mean, the most provocative thing I do is I ask people what the most important agricultural input is for them. And these are traditional farmers, but they all use chemical fertilizer. And then I ask them where it comes from. And there's just silence, and they're like, well, you know, Juan brings it. And then it's like, well, where does he get it? And it turns out that most of the fertilizer we use in Mexico comes from Russia or India. And they don't know any Russians or Indians. And so that massive disconnect, really, which I think was what we were talking about in the last panel, of like who's serving you, really comes into play. And I think that creates a dissonance in people that think of themselves very independent. And so then when they start telling the story of the next step that they want to take forward, it's that self-sufficiency, that working together, that can create sort of a shared future. And you ironically create that shared future by sort of coalescing around the points that you, in your culture and in your past, that you're proud of and that you want to continue forward.
But no politics around who has the biodigester and who doesn't?
Yeah, we deal with a lot of politics, right? So, and we, look, development is filled with a bunch of false dichotomies and a bunch of dogmas and sort of false binary systems, like aid versus not aid, like, oh, development work is apolitical, and it's just so false, right? So you can't, you're moving in on a fabric that's going to move and adjust as you impact it. There's no way that doesn't happen. But in this sort of idea of how to bring integrity into it, we got Coca-Cola to buy us a school bus that drives around and does theater talking about the negative aspects of soda and bottled water, and we like distribute water filters to communities. And you know, we have political parties that support us. I'm an Ashoka Fellow. My salary is paid by one of the largest microfinance groups in the world, and I offer 0% loans that are crowdfunded, and sometimes I ended up on panels with their banker boss that pays my salary, and I'm like, yeah, and that kind of interest is just, you know, it's not helping communities. And he's like, can I rescind that check? So I think you're going to play a political role, and maybe that's the key question with a lot of these sort of abstract design academic conversations is, I think there was an interesting idea of like, when do you actually insert yourself? As if you're a sociologist, are you really just looking on, or are you inserting a project and looking to see, like, I really like the provocative nature that Sean's work has, because is inserting himself, and not in an apolitical way either, right? I mean, there's a message there, and it comes from his own integrity, and then people are going to react to that because you can't anticipate how they're going to react. And so we have to take money from governments, and I think it comes down to this idea of how you allow the local and what your feedback is and the degree to which you're listening. And I think that's something that I think it was my lack of ability or sort of qualifications to be in the field in the first place that allowed me to go in a little bit more humble and as more of a journalist asking questions and trying to not have answers. And I'll just put a small segue in. The role I'm about to take on here in New York is for Charity Water, and so they're the largest private funder of water projects in the world. They've installed about 10,000 projects, and they did it with this phenomenal growth rate. So there was an inflection point. I mean, really amazing group that you should all look into. But the idea is that they basically had a model that connected with the people on the donor side in such a powerful way that they hit an inflection point of the amount of money that they were getting. And so their model was to make sure 100% of it went to the field and use local partners. So now they have 10,000 projects in 20 countries over N sort of iterations and contexts, and they want them all to last for 10 years. And that was sort of the blank slate I was given. And it would be tempting to say, all right, 10,000 projects, we need a meta strategy for this and make it all work. But I think what'll be interesting for this project is to sit on the ground and understand there's some things that will unite that challenge, and there's some things that just need to be sort of one-off solutions and maybe resisting that sort of scaled look at how we do things. I'll just leave it at that.
Aldo?
Our story is very much different because it's still in the air. So basically, what is for me the most important is that you stress the idea of what can have a meaning in a certain moment, in a certain place, in a certain context. And what you learn getting older is that you need time, because things sometimes they are too early. You need time for them to mature. And anyway, what the meaning? When I was speaking at the beginning about the service design, I mean, for me, the two big issues are the service design, because they are the activities, and the context in which these things can happen. I mean, can happen in a territory, can happen in a place, can be an opportunity for a community. So one is the work. Also in the story of today, it was very interesting when you were speaking about Brooklyn, because of saying, so what is all the microeconomy, the activity, how you can, the students, the people living there, how you can build a common project in which, I don't like to use the term win-win, but in which everybody, the two parts become, they're doing a real work in a way, so that is a social work, but you understand how is the logic, how it can happen, who you need. And another issue which is very interesting, and I like as an attitude of your school and what you do, is the interdisciplinary approach. Because in our case, we just show a dream, and we took that risk, because then you have to do all the work that you have done in Brooklyn. You have to involve to talk to the people, to have the sociologists, the anthropologists, to see. So these are stories that they show what you need to put together to make something interesting. And in all the parts of that, there is a lot of creativity, because you change the parameter, you change it. I mean, I need to go, I need to have, I don't know, Boston Consulting Group being in love with this project, because they can say to the investor that it's the right thing to do, instead of being conservative, as for example, in all the world real estate usually is. How to reuse the spaces, and in many of these cases, it exists already a volume that is going to be converted. So how not to have a waste of soil, a waste of, so there are many pieces they are going to waste. So this is a process. This is the indication. This is an idea of a process which has to be developed in every single part in a more interesting way of the usual one. And the issue about design in general, or this specific type of design / architecture, is that I like to consider this as contemporary, in the sense that is going to listen what is happening or what is going to happen. So how you have to be conscious of what is happening, and how the project can react and be propositional toward the reality that surrounds you. So again, in one sense you are listening, but in a sense you are sensitive on what's happening around and what is expecting. I mean, you are a school here, so you say in 5 years, when the students, they're going out of the school, which is the work that they will do. Mm-hmm. So which are the kind of projects that they will be needed? I see many times in the university where I teach sometimes in Italy and other places that if he's my kid, I know that I send him to study in a place when that at the moment in which he goes out, it doesn't exist the job for which he has studied for 5 years. So this is something that has to affect as a process the school mentality, to know that if you spend so much money in the States, is much more than in Italy usually, for your kids, that when they go out, they've learned something that is something that can continue, can serve the time you're living.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can I just jump in real quick? I really feel like the work that Aldo's doing is incredibly important, and there's not enough of it happening right now. When we do these workshops with the story of place, the outcome is often models or generally drawings in the form of how things work now, and so you can sort of identify these open loops that have inputs and outputs that are nonsensical and sort of lack a sense of logic, and how to close those loops. And that visualization is something that's really powerful, and so we really started emphasizing this point of drawing in a very beautiful way, right? Like, so creating a vision of an aesthetic future. And I think as a, well, how do we call ourselves? A tribe of people that are spending time thinking about these sort of questions, we're really quite bad at it. We really value within our own communities this idea of sort of individualistic creativity, but I don't feel like there's that we all could say that we're driving towards a future. And we've examined a lot of development projects that have failed, and they generally fail because they're trying to solve a problem. So you're saying this village doesn't have water, so now we brought them water, now it's fixed, right? So, but you didn't have that means that you've got a finite, you're like, done, I've finished it. But if you're not driving towards a vision, then you don't finish the water and say, what's the next step? And so as a community and people that I think maybe what unites us here is we're trying to drive change that I think goes towards an ecological sustainability mixed with social justice in sort of a broad strokes. Who's really, really good at projecting the future are businesses that are projecting out both oil consumption, the production of consumer goods, growth in developing markets. They already know what they want people in Kenya to be consuming in 20 years. Like, don't doubt that. But we, as a counterpoint to that, don't have a vision of what we would like our own community to look like in 20 years. We're actually letting ourselves be reactive. And so I think the power in the work that Aldo's doing is demonstrating that, you know, maybe it never occurred to me to have like a garden with a fish pond that I can also swim in and I can bike to from a city. Maybe you can't put all those things together. What a really beautiful vision. If we all could create that vision, then we can pre-identify the points where maybe we don't totally get along, or maybe, you know, but if we're all working towards something, then that sort of creativity can be iterative and unlimited in how we get there. And it's the same thing with Moore's Law. We don't know how we're going to do it, but we know how fast computer chips will work in 20 years. And I think that positive visualization, both in design and as a guiding ethic and as a way to bring us together as around a communication, is this interesting idea of a global linkage that's also hyper-local at the same time. So I just really applaud that.
I was also thinking of your project with the New York City Department of Imagination, or is that the, Yes, Rama.
I loved both of your presentations, and I don't know if you're familiar with the work of the Shanghai architecture group KUU. They were here maybe 2 years ago, and you can find their work online through the New School. Clive's comment about the designers sort of skirt around the issue of economics, I disagree with. I think that the interesting design is actually engaging those questions, and so I think you sort of shadowed it that you're next to Benetton, and I'm sure there's other thinking, going on of how you could do that, and you didn't talk about that, but I think designers are very aware of it. They don't often bring it out to the public, but that's how design operates. And what KUU...
In which sense?
In the sense that there would be support, and the designers are very aware of how to get that support and how to marshal a group of people. And what KUU is doing is there are islands outside of Shanghai.
Yeah, yes.
Exactly, and
Charming Island.
And they have fish farms, and they've created a leisure activity for factory workers to be able to go there and to feed the fish and take care of these farms. And they have active farms, and it's a leisure activity, and they take 2-week vacations. But they also, it's paid for because they're taking care of the farms. And so they've created these very sophisticated models, and actually the drawings look very similar in many ways.
It's very recent because China really did all this in the last 4 years, because I was teaching Tongji University.
Yeah, and so...
And it's incredible how they react.
Yeah.
China is reacting, they're the fastest one in reacting.
And so what KUU did is they did mapping projects of co-living of what Shanghai was even a few years ago, and is sort of disappearing, and saying how can they take that outside, and so outside the city. But I think there's a parallel project there that's exciting to investigate. But incredible work.
Now, what you say about the designer, for me, what is interesting about the role of the designer today is that is the only one that has no limits, basically, because architects, they feel to have a limit. I mean, city planner, they have a limit. Basically, the designer is the only actor that has no a problem of limitation in this sense, because, I mean, what you do or what I do, I mean, in the sense we are very broad from the little glass to this type of situation. And I think that what I was attracted by Parsons when I was reading in internet before coming to see you in November is that you are talking very much about these topics, and I mean, and luckily, is becoming something that the schools are reacting. In Italy is a part of the Polytechnic, but in Italy there is not at all this type of discussion on these topics, because it's still very much today we are talking about how we are very close in our discipline. We are speaking today before. I mean, the idea is how you can discuss easily. What was very nice, and I'm very happy to have been here, is that even the participants at this seminar, they were, for somebody looking strictly functionally at the problem, they were so much far away, the one from the other, that is very nice to take the time to listen to the other point of view. I mean, because you think that is useless for you, you start being skeptical, and the same is the multidisciplinary work, because you have to decide to share. And if you decide to share, you have to be more humble, to listen to what somebody else is saying. Maybe you think it's stupid, and you understand that was right. But this is something that doesn't happen, is not the normality, the multidisciplinary approach, or the idea that you are listening, because everybody is usually very proud of his own or of his discipline, ideal way of being, or whatever.
Yeah. At the back there, in the blue.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about...
maybe you want, I think they're trying to record. Yeah.
To kind of ask you to elaborate a little bit on some of the process that go into the initial steps in social engagement. I think as the popularity of design for social good and impact design, you have an influx of designers, entering communities that aren't their own. I think there's terms like parachute designers coming in to, and I think we all want to refrain from saying we're going to help anybody. But when you initially enter, I'm the outsider coming in to help, but you have this one side where, as the social entrepreneur and the designer, you do want to interrupt to help change the status quo. On the other side, it's really important to listen and find out, where the point in that system is that can be interrupted, respectfully done so. But still, you have the, I think, even in New York, going from working in a neighborhood that is, in some ways distinct or different from the one you live in, you're still considered like a community outsider. So could you guys maybe elaborate or talk about what that process is like and how, what difficulties you've encountered and how you maybe worked to, not prove yourself, but, to enter into the community conversation successfully?
I think that he is more in the field in a real way.
You make sure you don't make those
but
little people angry.
You are not a designer, you are a social entrepreneur or entrepreneur, whatever. I mean, in my case, I've done this with the school basically. With the Polytechnico just 2 months ago, we have done a project just in the area where the school is, for example. And sorry, but what is, I work on that, but what's the topic of what exactly the questions? The question that you have done?
How do they go? How do you go about doing it? Am I right? That's the as an outsider. If you're an outsider entering a community, an area, etc., with something, even though you may be listening and intervening, but you are creating an intervention. How do you go about doing that?
I think that you are, before being a designer, you are a human being with a certain intelligence, and what I think one of the great quality with the come si dice in inglese il buon senso?
Good common sense, good sense.
Common sense.
Yeah.
Having being not that arrogant, but having a common sense, and you start to interact. And I mean, what is so-called creativity, you apply in what is a social relation. I mean, it's just something that you do together. What it happened with the students, with other people. We have analyzed with other people, with all the people living in the place, coming in the school and speak, etc., etc. But it's just she spoke this morning about, I think she's more qualified than me to answer to this. But I mean, is an idea, if you start the society from zero, you're starting to think what you need, how it can happen, what is better to do and what is bad to do. I think it's not a problem of specialization, it's a problem of bringing what you can bring and being together with other people that they bring what is needing for a certain situation. The important, in my opinion, is always to know what you need to create or to provoke something that is a rich solution to a problem. I mean, it's like what we were saying before about the problem of the water. You have a vision, or you just want to solve a little problem that you have been asked to solve. So I think that, I don't know if I answered exactly to what you were saying, but I mean, is the building of a process, seeing what is the material available that you have to face a certain situation, I mean, and what you need more to put together, and that is what multidisciplinarity, as an example, is. I mean, to have all the parts that you need to create something with the interesting, with the meaning, with the.
Alex, do you maybe want to speak to how you've done that in the context?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's actually a really common question that we get, and I appreciate that you asked it. It often comes really loaded to me. I'm like a white male American working anywhere else in the world. I fall within this like really easy box of the parachute designer, right? So it's like sort of the burden that I carry when it comes to doing this sort of work is like, oh, well, what right did you have? And I never knew the us is them equation, but I would have used that as an answer a long time ago. But listen, I think that there's a series of dogmas in development, and one of them is this idea that you can't come out from the outside and impact local communities, and a lot of people want this black and white. And so when people ask me, they want me to give them the model, right? So what is your community intervention model? And I really think that is actually such a limiting question in the sense that you're assuming that there's a way to work with a community, and then they're obviously not using community accurately. They're actually literally talking about a cluster of people, that if there were 2 houses, there'd be 2 political parties and 2 viewpoints and 2 ideas of what should be done next, right? So I'm a real big fan recently of boring development, and there's actually the best blog is called Unsexy Development on the subject, and really a lot of I just want to touch on 2 points. One is we actually had this conversation over lunch as well. A lot of times we have universities that go all over the world and they parachute in because they want to help, right? And so probably the most damaging thing is that they're not really willing to put their efforts for good behind the really boring and unsexy things that probably are the next step to help a lot of communities or to help get an already designed thing. They not only want to help, but they want it to be their new idea, and they want it to be a silver bullet, and they want it to be completely designed from scratch. I mean, you tell a college student, like, no, don't redesign this. It actually works pretty well. It's not that sexy, but like it doesn't break, and like help me put 1,000 in. They're like, you know, that's not what they want. And so, but then the question then becomes, if they get a lot out of it, they're probably the largest beneficiary of this project. Was that bad? On the other hand, I've got this crazy artist from New York, and he shows up every once in a while completely unannounced and imposes himself on our projects in ways that you would cringe. He doesn't speak Spanish. He shows up at communities that are owned by the government, and he paints all the schools, like, but not paints, like graffiti artists, like doesn't ask permission, shows up at these classrooms and completely vandalizes federal property. Doesn't speak Spanish, and has got all the kids like running around painted, probably their like school uniforms that their parents saved up for are like covered in paint. It's one of the most brilliant interventions we've seen, because we can't control him and nobody can, and we don't even know where he comes from or where he's from. And it's really quite phenomenal because he has a sense of emotional maturity and this sort of like empathetic evolution that it's really, but people connect with him, and he cannot speak a lick of Spanish, and kids like learn from him. It's really, really phenomenal. But if you were to have like an appropriate technology or development specialist talk about that, it's completely irresponsible. And I agree, of course, but it's also pretty awesome. So I don't really know. I think trying to answer that question again, like there is one intervention model that is a clear model, and it's like the consumer model, which is Coca-Cola has a beautiful intervention model everywhere they go in the world. We don't have that, because I think the way that our technology or the next step moves forward needs to be informed by the place that we come to. And I will just also add that I think it's a good signal of a good initiative, or like patting ourselves on the back, that we started very small in a very specific spot, and word of mouth, and so we've never just showed up at a community unsolicited. There's always been a link that's quite human and quite on the ground and quite slowly and organically developed that's allowed us to move into the next place. So potentially we don't have to examine that as I think not parachuting in the first place is a good way to address that.
I want to tell a story from another context. Sorry, just really briefly. The word help, I understand why it's a problem. I do. There's a power imbalance. However, there's a wonderful movie called Examine Life, in which Judith Butler, I mean, it's different circumstances, but it's still relevant. Judy Butler is taking a walk with an artist named Sonny Taylor. And they're talking, the artist is in a wheelchair. And they're talking about how she negotiates her life. And Judy says something like, since when, what kind of society do we live in when it's wrong to ask for help or offer help? So I guess it's how help is understood. I mean, Martha Nussbaum talks in the same movie about the nanny state and how we worry about, helping people as reducing them somehow. I understand the balance of power there should be some more equilibrium there. On the other hand, the idea of engagement might be a more positive way to think.
I think people are only talking about unasked for help, right? Asking for help and giving help is different from help that wasn't asked for in the first place, right? Yeah. Peter? Yeah.
Just wanted to say how much I liked this session also as a sort of rejoinder to the previous session, in that we sort of hit a bit of an impasse in the previous session, which was the old familiar one of what is a designer supposed to do, just say no to the client or say yes and then turn it to hopefully good means. What I liked about this session is it moved it on that argument on to show different ways of using a sort of designer's rhetorical armory to envision and persuade and engage, I guess. And the rhetorical armory was quite stunning, I think. You know, both the little models that Aldo showed and those beautiful drawings, and then the sort of puppet show that Alex showed. So I'm sort of curious to hear any sort of thoughts you have on how this discussion and the methods used might inform that impasse, the sort of client-designer commercial situation. We always tend to think is the sort of default, you know, that's the design, as opposed to this, you know, social entrepreneurship stuff, which is kind of new and cool, but we don't know how it fits.
His answer is probably going to be a little longer, so I'll just jump in that I think we continue to live in a bunch of false dichotomies. This difference between social design and design just seems like one of the more absurd ones. I'm not a designer, so I'll leave it to you guys to hash out, but I think that what we've come to the conclusion in this sense is that our product or even our business, its long-term viability, I can't answer to, but I'm hoping that we've gotten the message out to a degree that I realize that technology really isn't going to change anything. Design's not really going to change anything. It's the spark that at some moment in time that we could all do something different tomorrow. Like, we could literally not buy Doritos ever again starting tomorrow. And so the idea that we live in this force of nature, which is consumerism, is completely false. You know, we could just decide to buy a really good knife and sharpen it for the rest of our lives and teach our kids to do so. And so the question is what role does design have to provide the spark that makes somebody make that decision or unifies our vision around something like that? And so I think that role of, I mean, if you need to be pragmatic to pay the bills, it's one thing, but I think that we all can make decisions that align our values with our vision of what we want in the future and stop creating these false silos. And I think that I love the miniature macro, and I keep bringing it back to Jenny's work, but the idea of interdisciplinary being the new edge when every single one of our cells in the air molecules around us have worked together since, you know, forever. I mean, that's how we work. That's how we're programmed. I think learning from that and stop creating these false constructs and like putting yourself in a box that doesn't really exist. Like, I'm not a designer. I'm a journalist, and I run like an engineering company. So
I found a resource. Now I know when I need something. You're fantastic. Now, you know what? Just in one, I'll be short, not like him. Just say, you know, you have to involve creative business in the interdisciplinary. Because when I was saying, I don't know, in Italy, we know Boston Consulting as a group, that if Boston Consulting is falling in love with this project and they did this, you find the investor, the developer is happy because he has not Aldo Cibic, but Boston Consulting saying that it's something very intelligent. When they give the okay, the developer has the money from the bank or from the investors. So the step is very close to become real. Of course, as everything has to be adjusted, in reality is different, whatever you want. But is one of the main that instead of making finance business of super speculation, you can make another business, which is another business on tourism, on new tourism, on agriculture, on food, on whatever you want, which is related to that specific, but is going to happen. I mean, it's just many of these things that are going to happen. Many of the service design of the story you've done, I was speaking today about Airbnb, about service design. Or Airbnb, I mean, is an idea of many that we have done in some workshop in Politecnico or wherever. And this guy made the company. Now, after 5 years, there are 400 people working, all the world involved. I mean, the same is for this type of project. You have a vision, and you need all the parts. The business is the business side is very important, but has to be a creative business. And I think that in this country, is easier than in other places. I mean, to do this type of to make real this type of
projects. I was short.
Are there any other questions? We'll have to leave that as the spark of methane, right? That ends this session.
I just can't thank you enough. I feel like, there was a little bit of, liberty in my constructing the saving the carrot for the end thing, but boy, you sure made me seem smart. I think, what's interesting, before we leave this discussion, I met with a woman named Alessandro Pomerico, who is helping the city of Lecce in southern Italy put in its bid for the European Cultural Capital. You're involved in that?
Yes.
Okay. She was telling me.
Sorry.
To give you some texture to Aldo's presentation. Not only is this this vision going to happen, it's already happening in Italy because there aren't opportunities. Young people are going home to grow their food, partly like 30-year-olds from Brooklyn went to the Catskills, partly. She said, not really, though. They really need to eat. And that was really shocking. And when I met you, Aldo, you said, you think it's tough to do things here. You think come to Italy. I mean, there's many more places that can probably tell the same story, but I was really moved by that. And I wanted to say something to Chris Bull. Where are you? Wherever you are. There you are. Your very thoughtful, close reading of Benjamin, unfortunately, because the conversation got directed in other ways, didn't quite get acknowledged. And I thought the fact that you picked up on the sort of, again, kind of a false binary, but a perceived binary that either science and technology could solve things or it's going to kill us. It's always both. It's just always both. The thing that Clive always reminds students and gives us heart, even though he's our resident pessimist, is that this is design's opportunity. This is our opportunity. And we've just seen examples of opportunity. And I think the other question that may be going through some of your minds is, lovely, Susan, you had this nice conversation. You talked about agency and abstract. You did it in the academy in this nice room. But I do think telling stories and sharing stories doesn't stop here, that you're going to go out and talk to people. And to paraphrase Philip Lopate again, I think we might all feel a little less lonely and a little less freakish because of the stories that you've shared with us. So thank you all for coming very, very much.
Thank you.